Yeah. So I think we might have hashed this out. So Andrew, do you want to go ahead with? It sounds like you had another objection to the Kalam.
Well, I'm not sure if it's entirely separate, just because things are a little maybe blurry for me, or maybe where I'm going is about to be blurry. My issue with the first premise is just to reiterate what it claims is whatever begins to exist has a cause. I have a question about what we would count as an example of something that begins to exist at all. Can you give me an example of anything that we can point to that begins to exist?
Are you just going to say it's just like we're rearranging matter or something?
Well, we are when we think about it. When usually the example people will give is, where did I come from? And they'll say, well, you came from your parents, and trace that down. And yes. So when have we noticed, what can we point to say that anything actually begins to exist?
Well, I mean,
what do you mean by existence there first?
Are you assuming it's like
what are you saying is beginning
exists? Because I don't think that's how it's.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that, I think I'm drinking a Coke right now. The Coke can, I think, began to exist, but the idea is that it's it came from prior material. It didn't begin to exist in the sense that Craig is talking about, So when we see that things that begin, right? So when we see
the Coke can, in my eyes, then would be a label we assign to the collective.
Well, I don't want to go in that direction. I'm just saying that it's
So, Andrew, are you a mereological nihilist?
I'm not certain what those terms mean.
Well, okay, yeah. So, can you tell us what that is? See if that's what Andrew is.
Are you talking to Jake?
Jesus, it's like you believe in proper parts or not.
Yeah, I think mereological nihilists are skeptical of material, at least material part-whole relations. Is that it, Jake?
I mean, basically there are no real objects, right? Or at least, I guess, no non-simple or no objects with parts, right? Electrons exist only if they are atomic.
So, I mean, I feel like this is a good objection to push back, though. When you say, what do you mean everything begins to exist has a cause?
Rewinding.
We don't know anything beginning to exist. Everything
not in the sense that Craig is talking about, right?
Matter. So, in what sense does Craig mean it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, what do you like whether it's like a efficient cause or material cause kind of thing? Is that what you're saying?
I'm confused now. Well, when he says begin to exist, I think he means something like a human, or I don't know, a tree coming from a seed or something like that, doesn't he? Or like someone designing a car and making a car. He would say the car didn't exist before we made it. It had a cause.
Yes,
that's what I thought he meant.
Yeah.
I would draw the comparison. The car is just like the Coke can, that the components of the car were already there. The only thing that makes a car in some sense would be what we attribute to it. Maybe we had intent as agents to create it, to assemble it. So I don't like the words like create or exist, because
I think that's going
all of those are contingent.
Right, but I mean, we have to deal with what Craig means, don't we?
That's right.
We can't just be like, well, I have a different definition of begin to exist.
I can read for you what he says.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Craig, mumbo jumbo as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, he says we can explicate this last notion as follows: for any entity E at time t, E comes into being at t if and only if E exists at t. T is the first time at which E exists. There is no state of affairs in the actual world in which E exists timelessly, and E's existing at t is a tense fact. Those are his conditions.
Okay, I think I
beginning to
can.
exist.
What was the second
Can you
last
put
one?
that in English?
Yeah, I can copy and paste it in the chat if you guys want to read it over.
Okay.
I think I tracked it. If I break one example down, for instance, let's go to the smallest thing. Can we truly say when an electron came into existence, knowing that
Holy
it
fuck.
was from nothing itself? Can we say any piece?
Yeah, why not? I don't see what the problem is. I mean, except for this part about like not having existed timelessly, which is a little confusing. I feel like you can use those definitions fairly robustly.
Yeah, he did that to exempt God, because otherwise, if he didn't put that part, God would have God would have.
Excuse me, John. You
I
said
don't
I'm
know.
obsessed with William Lane Craig. That's why I'm quoting him. The question is about what William Lane Craig says and what his position is. What the hell are you on about, dude?
Yeah,
What do you
we
want me to
like
quote
Hayden
John Lee? You
literally
want me to quote John Lee instead of William Lane Craig? Come
and
on, bro.
Hayden literally asked
Jake,
for it. Like that.
Jake, Jake, just insist that John Lee never quote you anymore because I'm sure he considers you
No,
heretical as a Muslim,
actually,
right?
uh, Jake is really knowledgeable about what Craig views. He quotes him all the time. I'm very
Yeah, but
impressed
you
Jake,
better
by
not
how much
quote
he
him
knows
because he's
about
a
Craig.
heretic.
Jake, can I take that definition that you put in the chat and apply it to like a new human being, like at conception?
I
I'm
think
just
you
asking
can.
Yeah,
that so I
it's
can
meant to be.
understand what it means. I
Yeah,
want to
it's
know if I
meant to be.
understood him.
Yeah, it's meant to apply to any example. So if you think that the event or of a new human being coming into existence fits
Yeah.
that criteria, then sure. I mean,
Well, that's just my way of seeing if I understand what all those words meant, and I think you're saying I do, so that's good. Because
I think
it's
it
not
mostly
exactly
tracks the
clear. It's
common
not
sense
exactly
notion.
clear, right? So it's saying if it wasn't
I
there
think it was.
before and it's there now, right? That means it's come
Yeah,
into existence.
yeah. This definition of beginning to exist, would satisfy the Coke can, the human being, and I think Craig's sense of the beginning of the universe.
Yeah,
correct.
ex nihilo
Well,
creationism. Yeah.
Conveniently not God, right? Like
Right.
that's why
Okay.
that dodgy
That's why
third
that
thing
timelessly
isn't there.
thing
So
is
it's
there.
like a new thing. Even if it's made up of existing things, it's a new thing, therefore it's come into
Yeah.
existence.
but that would mean that everything comes into existence. Like it's first a can comes into existence before the lettering of the label of Coke is written on the side of it. It really does seem to remove any value for the concept of creation because these are labels that we seem to be giving to what is created. We've assigned a label.
So one observation actually is that I think premise 3 or whatever, like condition 3 is I think redundant because it just follows from premise 2. I mean, sorry, condition 2. Because if there is a first such time at which the thing exists, then it can't exist timelessly, right?
Right. So everything that begins
Because
to
it would exist
exist
all the
has a
time.
Right.
cause.
So there wouldn't be a
So
first time.
Well,
it's just saying if at any point in time something didn't exist, it must have come into existence.
All of this
yeah. So
is just temporality.
right. So, but I still don't know
Uh,
why. Just because something comes into existence, it needs a cause. And that's premise one, right?
Yeah, but that's
deductive.
another question. That's kind of what's up for
Well,
debate, right?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I thought we were debating the Kalam right now. Are we doing it? Are we doing this?
I don't know.
I thought we would. I thought we'd already
I thought
started.
you guys just wanted to understand what Craig's
Well, I
position
think
was on this thing.
This
yeah,
is helpful.
yeah,
This is
This is
yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, this is part of the breakdown I'm seeing. I'd like to correlate that same first issue of existence with, for instance, what we consider the third law of thermodynamics, that not energy is
Can,
never
can you
matter is
stop
never
this?
created or destroyed. The same cycle there. That's what I'm wondering where coming into existence is in this picture.
I have a question for Jake on this, on your argument.
So I had a question. Do we have any examples of things beginning to exist? Isn't everything just recomposed?
I mean, that would be my question too. What does begin to exist really mean? I was just trying to sort of, show that what Abdul and Jake are saying with respect to the inference that the argument makes, and the first and the second premise, and the structure and all that, they are correct on that.
Yeah, it's valid,
No,
but
you were
if
not.
I thought we
the
were just
premise
talking
is
about the
everything that begins
composition
to
fallacy.
Yeah, but you were not
exist has a
repurposing.
cause, and
This is
then kind of an empty
Yeah, but this
argument.
is something that William Lane Craig really laughs at. He mocks the idea because people have said to him, well, you know what? You really were here during the Jurassic Age too. You just weren't in the form of a human being. He really mocks that idea, and so do I.
Well, the fact that he mocks that idea doesn't mean that that doesn't bear
Well,
on the idea.
it just
so
sounds
I don't
absurd to say,
understand.
well, hey, I was always here. I was just in a different form.
Well,
wait, who says
but you're
that?
referring to identity. You're saying I. That's an
Yeah,
abstraction.
but I think that's what the argument is. You're saying, well, does anything
No.
really begin to exist? That's what you're trying to argue, at least how I'm understanding.
No. I'm saying
it's
that
just
the atoms that make up your body existed long before you were I, and so you're just a
Well, we were just
recomposition.
stardust from exploded stars, Johnny.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the material that we're made up of has existed as long as existence. Really, we're just recomposed.
Well, but did that have a beginning too?
Well, no, that's the point.
Oh, it
Everything that
didn't.
you can
Okay.
identify, everything that you can claim had a beginning is just a recomposition. It didn't actually begin. It just recomposed.
Well, I disagree because, well, you heard what I said earlier about it. I mean, it was a little bit off subject. I know Jake and others were arguing something different than what I was talking about. But the way I see it, again, I'm not going to go into it that deep as I did before because it'll just be redundant. But everything that exists had a beginning. Now, you don't have to accept it. That's fine.
Well, can you give an example of a concrete object that began to
I just
exist?
explained it earlier. I mean, I don't know how long you've been here, but I don't want to I don't want to go through it again.
I mean, is the discussion the Kalam argument itself, or is it the composition fallacy?
No, he's just asking, when you mean begins to exist, he's saying you're obviously not meaning it poofed into existence, but that there's a causal relationship. So he's asking for explanation what we mean by that. And I would say that you would have to concede that like previous material was used to generate this material that is me, that was used to generate the material that's my trees outside or my kids, like these things. So yes, I believe that God is repurposing material that he created. But so that's something that's just go ahead and answer that question. There's no point in I think arguing against them on that. Now it's just then if they concede that if the universe is made out of material and the universe was not always as it is now, then you could say the universe has a cause. And I think that it's so much easier to just, for atheists to say universe has a cause or an explanation, and just move on to the next part. Because I think the contingency arguments and what that first cause would be and the necessity out of that would be is a much more fruitful conversation.
Well, for Craig, that's a part of the Kalam cosmological argument. The conceptual analysis of what it would mean to be a cause of the universe, at least for Craig, is going to be a part of his Kalam cosmological argument, or his defense of it.
And the theist is not arguing that the universe was recomposed of pre-existing stuff.
Yeah, it was
They're arguing that God
ex nihilo.
Yeah, exactly, from nothing. And so they're combining two premises together that aren't actually related.
No, they're not saying from nothing. Why would you say that the theist is saying from nothing?
Craig says that at least. I don't know if anybody here does, but
I don't know that Craig is using nothing in the sense that I think you're trying to imply it now.
Like literal nothingness, philosophical nothingness? Yes, Craig thinks God brought the universe into existence ex nihilo. He believes it was a creatio ex nihilo event. He said this extensively in the literature he's written on this.
Well, I think what he means by the nothing, he doesn't believe that absolutely nothing.
It's a philosophical nothingness, yes.
Hang on.
There is not anything that God created the universe from.
Let me finish my sentence. God bless it. You people and your interruptions. What I believe that he is stating is not that it came from nothing. but that the nothing is God, and that this universe proceeded from God. God is something. But he's not saying that there was any preconditioned material that God interacted with.
Yeah, Leo,
Well,
a
well, of
philosophical
course not.
nothing
Well, of
is
course
the
not. He thinks that God created the universe from nothing. So of course he doesn't think there was some
no,
sort of
a
material.
philosophical
What Craig means when he says that God created the universe from nothing isn't that there was a thing there and that thing is nothing and God used that thing that is nothing to create the universe. What he means is that God didn't create the universe from anything. God created the universe not from anything at all. It was merely an act of God's will. There was not anything from which the universe was created. It was creatio ex nihilo. This is extensive in his literature. I don't know how you
Okay,
could
so
deny this.
listen. Here's the thing.
a
Look,
Yeah,
wait.
no, it's a very simple. All
Okay.
Craig's saying is that there's no material cause, right? So there's an efficient cause. There's no material
Yes.
cause. This is what Craig is saying.
that doesn't mean
But then in
nothing, though. That
yeah,
doesn't.
just real quick.
Nothing is philosophical. Nothing is the absence of everything. So if God existed, then it's not the case that the universe came
Yeah,
from
but God
nothing.
didn't create the universe from himself. The
His
universe was
Yeah, he
it
created
did.
came
as
from his
well,
it came
not
from
No, he
in
his
did.
desire to
Craig's
create it.
view.
The universe
Not in
came from his
Craig's view.
will.
That is not
From his
Craig's view, at
will
least.
and his words and his breath.
Yes, but God wasn't the thing from which the universe was made. That's not so. So it was a creatio ex nihilo. This is what Craig says. Yes,
Craig would
there
That's
is
what
an
say
he
it came
means.
efficient
from
cause,
God's
and
will.
there is no material cause.
Craig would say it came from God's will.
Yes, it was an act of God's will from which the universe was brought into existence.
It was.
So
He's
God's
just
will is
denying.
But
something.
there wasn't
no.
something that God acted on from which the universe was
Yeah,
constructed.
he's
Here, would you
just he's
say that
just
the universe?
It was a pure act of will.
Would
That's
you
what
say that?
yeah,
Craig
and
takes
he's
to
just
mean. That's what
Craig
Would
is
you
Craig
just
takes creatio ex nihilo to mean here.
yes,
So
would you
yes, and
say
he's
that?
just denying that God's will is material. Big deal.
Well, would you say that the universe is composed of God's will?
well, no, I would not know. I'm not a theist. I'm just
No, I'm asking
explicating
the
what.
theist.
Oh,
I'm
my bad.
asking that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Would you say
Yeah,
that the
sorry.
universe is composed of God's will?
So look, I'm honestly, I'm just gonna say this and go down because I'm not here for this discussion. It was just the composition thing. But then the person who said that you're using to like that maybe you were implying that there was an equivocation or something because you're saying it has a cause, and then the kind of cause or creation that someone like Craig is referring to isn't really a cause. That's not really true because I mean the argument doesn't say everything that begins to exist has a material cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a material cause, or that it was created ex nihilo. So it's if you're going to say that God's creation of the universe without his acting upon prior matter is not a cause, well, that would be an argument of its own. But then if you're not saying that, then there's nothing really wrong with the argument in terms of validity if creation ex materia and creation ex nihilo are both forms of causation. So anyway, I was just here to discuss that whole part to whole composition fallacy versus inductive generalization thing. So thanks, guys. Yeah, take care.
But the point I was making is that in premise one, everything that begins to exist, well, we don't have any examples of that. We only have examples of things being recomposed. So then if you combine that with the universe began to exist, does that mean the universe was composed? I don't think that's what the theist means
No,
here.
but you'd be
And so that's
fine.
why the argument doesn't work.
No, you'd be fine
Well,
He's
if
just
but
you.
equivocating on what it means to begin. That's
Hold
just
on. Hold on.
equivocation.
well, no, because what the response is going to be is that I mean, sure, it might be the case that there's recombination of physical material, but it's that's just in the case of material causation. But when it comes to the universe, that's not material causation. And then
If
someone
you
like
guys.
Craig would say that to say that oh well, there really isn't any causation. Things don't really begin to exist. It's just a recomposition or some sort of transposition of pre-existing material. What Craig would say is that just seems to commit somebody to mereological nihilism, and he's going to say that one ought not be committed to mereological nihilism.
So what I'm going to point out is that even if you guys want to switch it to explanation, we could say that everything that begins to exist has an explanation, or everything that's recomposited has an explanation. If the universe has not always existed in its current, which we know from the Big Bang, the point of the singularity, that the universe was not as it is today, which means that the universe has been um, either changed from its original state or
Evolved.
progressed into another state. But you would have to
Evolved.
say that that still works within the causal or explanation relationship. That's why, like this, the first cause argument is just it's like such a silly hill, I think, for people to die arguing against, because the first cause doesn't automatically demonstrate that a God exists. It doesn't, you know, it's not like a super slam dunk for a theist, because then I've still got to get into contingency and why I think that that beginning has to have a will. Like, there's a lot of things you have to get into.
Well, I think here is probably where the discussion would just end up getting into like what you mean by cause, like what model of causation you're working with.
I think it's more about what existence is, what's meant by existing, what's meant by everything, as opposed to universe. There's a lot of confusion.
What's meant by what?
Yeah, the word begin
Exist,
is really what
exist,
begin is what
begin.
throws things off, because if you talk about begin as in prior to beginning there was nothing and then there was something, well, that's what I think the theist is referring to when they say God made the universe begin. But we don't actually have any examples of things beginning to exist in that way. We only have recomposition.
Well, no, I created a cup of coffee. It's composed of beans and water. It began to exist.
The beans and water
But that's a
began
very
to exist?
simplistic. No, the cup of coffee, like I said.
Well, that's just a
I
recomposition of
created,
beans and water.
but I created a cup of coffee, which
What do
began
you
to
mean by
exist
created?
when I composed it, when I took the items of beans and water. So I mean, it's very old and not very thought out argument. I mean, obviously, you're calling attention to the things that the creation are made up of, but that's not what it's speaking to. Clearly,
Well, yeah, it's speaking to creatio ex nihilo, which I agree here. I think the point that Null is trying to make is that the concept of creatio ex
no,
nihilo seems
the Kalam
almost
is not doing that.
incoherent. That well, I didn't say that it was. But is that the
We're not talking
concept of
about.
create?
We're not
Is that the
talking about
concept?
ex nihilo.
Is that the concept of creatio ex nihilo is going to be incoherent? That's we've never observed. Wait, what does it mean? What does this notion of begins to exist? What does it mean to say that something's existence begins? What does that look like? Because when you make a cup of coffee, nothing is beginning. There isn't something that was not existing that is now. Everything
Did
you're
the cup of
using
coffee
was
exist
already
before I
there.
made it?
What do you? It depends on what you mean by that particularly. I mean, there is some
You're
sense in which
confused?
there is some sense in which the cup of coffee was extant through the space-time reality, but you may not have been co-extended alongside particular instances of that cup of coffee. Yes, because I'm a tense anti-realist. And then that's another thing that you get with particularly the first premise of the Kalam is the difference between tense realism and tense anti-realism with respect to time.
Right. The Eiffel Tower always existed. How many Eiffel Towers exist?
Well, no, always is the wrong word, because always is a tense. Always is a tensed term. So somebody who holds to a tense-less view isn't going to say that the Eiffel Tower always exists. Just that the Eiffel Tower exists. There might be instances where humans were not co-extended in the same spatio-temporal points with the Eiffel Tower, but that doesn't mean that the Eiffel Tower isn't in space-time somewhere.
But you're just talking about
Leo,
Leo,
let me ask you a question. What if you're anything other than a reductive materialist or reductive physicalist about the mind, and consciousness is seen as something that's like an emergent property or something? Would consciousness have began to exist?
Well, it depends what you mean by begins to exist.
Existing after having not existed.
Well, I would say no. I would say that there's obviously always going to be some place in the space-time continuum where consciousness is extended.
What do you mean? I mean, like, so okay, so assume consciousness is like causally downstream, emergent, and it hasn't always been the case that there are
Imagine if I had a piece of paper, just your standard piece of paper that you had in school, and I draw a line right in the middle of it that's an inch long. But I go to one of the corners of the paper and I put my finger there and I say, is there a line? What are you going to answer? Yes, or are you going to answer no? I mean, there is a line on the paper. There isn't a line where I'm pointing to on the paper, but there's a line somewhere on the paper. So the question is there a line isn't going to be entirely meaningful.
So right now you're relying on some kind of like a B theoretic view of time, and you're saying that, okay. So putting that aside, right? So assuming that we're saying that something that begins to exist is something that exists at that has a first moment of existence, before which, regardless of your metaphysics of time, before which it did not exist. Okay, so it exists at certain points of time. And prior to that, it did not exist. So assume you have this emergent view of consciousness. Would consciousness have began to exist?
Well, it's just a malformed question for somebody like me, because I don't. This question of before is just a relative. So it's going to be before to some people, but it's not going to be before to others. So I don't. There is no one unified answer to that question.
Yeah, but keep in mind the guys here who are bringing up the whole view that everything is just a recombination of prior stuff are sort of looking at it in this like simplistic way that kind of it like doesn't really take all that metaphysical baggage into consideration, right? So I'm just saying, on that commonsensical view of things beginning to exist or not beginning to exist, them being rearrangements or not being rearrangements, just on that question, you would say that, given that just very basic view that you guys were putting forward, this emergent phenomenon, whether it's of consciousness or something else, would count as something that is an exception to that rule of recombination, right?
Well, I think I would make the case.
Consciousness is no. I think consciousness is a combination of particular physical aspects, structures.
No,
yeah,
think it's
you're
emergent?
Not listening to me. I said
yes,
I started.
You think it's emergent?
Yes.
So it begins?
No, begins isn't the language I would use.
Is emergent?
So the
is that a temporal term?
A language you would use with anything.
Term? No.
But what's the point of you
Leo,
criticizing?
We're not debating B theory right now, right?
Exactly,
that's
because
Leo
questions. Because Leo, begins seem to be a perfectly intelligible word that you were denying. Not you were denying something beginning to exist, but the word beginning seemed to be perfectly intelligible until this example came up. Is my concern. So
I don't
right
think
now.
So. I think, in fact, two people here brought up that they're a little bit confused on what means. I mean, Noel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both of us are confused still. But
it wasn't from your standpoint, though, Leo. It wasn't from.
Well, I expressed
actually
a couple of equations that I agreed with the question that Noel was raising.
So I would make the
but
case
it wasn't
that
on the basis of B theory. That's the point.
Well, that's fine, but all I pointed out is that is going to be something that factors into this discussion, as we have seen.
Yeah, but that's well known.
Like, trying to avoid that discussion isn't going to help. Like,
but we're not trying to avoid that,
dude. To the discussion.
So
that's we're not trying to avoid that, but Craig himself admits that the argument is basically run assuming A theory. I mean, he does argue for it extensively in his text.
I'm objecting to.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. That's not the discussion that we were initially having. And the people objecting to it, they weren't making the criticism based on some B theoretic framework as an assumption. That had nothing to do with it. So we're trying to address the other consideration first about, under A theory, does anything begin to exist? That's what was being addressed.
I think that's where we're at. I think things can begin to exist under the A theory, but I don't think that if somebody presumes a B theory, that's going to make
okay. But I don't think that the other people objecting were assuming that, Leo. That's the point.
Yeah,
see.
that's fine. I never
me
said
try
that
to.
anybody assumed that. I don't know
Yeah,
why you guys are
they were.
saying that I said things I never said.
I never said that, but I'm explaining to you why moving on to the B theory and arguing about that is not really helpful when there are people who were claiming that things don't begin to exist with the
Well,
assumption
I
of the
wasn't the
A
one that
theory.
really like stimulated that. People asked me questions when I merely mentioned it, and then
Yeah,
the
yeah, but
discussion moved in that
you
direction.
interacted with
So,
it, Leo. Let me
yeah,
explain
yeah,
something
but
to
I'm
you.
not the one that brought it up, am I? Or
Yeah, yeah, no,
initiated
no.
a
But when you
discussion on it, rather.
But
Can I
let me
make a
just explain.
distinction?
Let me just explain this point. So right now, when the person brought up the whole coffee example, where he made a cup of coffee, it wasn't when he said that it began to exist. Your response wasn't, "Hey, nothing begins to exist," and then
No, that wasn't my
you didn't
response.
bring in
No.
the philosophy of time. You didn't bring in
Actually, I
any theoretic
did.
considerations. What you were
Because
talking
that
about,
would
as
be
I heard,
relevant to my explanation. I did bring
but
that, and I said it's going to depend on, and that's when I said this is where philosophy of time becomes relevant. Whether or not something begins to exist is really going to depend on how you view time. That's exactly what I said, and then that's where the discussion moved into to talking about time, because it's very much relevant to what we're discussing.
that's fine. That's fine. So if you said that, then that's okay. But then what I heard from like the past 10 minutes or so was you actually affirming the idea that all we see is a recombination of prior matter into new forms, and nothing
Yes.
really begins to exist in that sense. So that's the main part I heard. And when I asked my question, that's when I heard the whole uh, uh, um, theories of time consideration coming into the picture, and what emergence or beginning really is in the first place. So in that sense, I mean, I see that as a concern, because given the way the conversation was going, I think the example I gave would help maybe shed some light on what it could mean for something to begin to exist, at least on like just a commonsensical view of time, to like an A
So,
theory of time.
so
But
let me
anyway,
jump in here.
thanks,
Let me
guys.
jump in here with the let me jump in with a distinction here, because
So
the cup of
I'll be
coffee
listening. I'll be
and
listening, but I'm gonna go down. Okay, thanks.
okay, the cup of coffee, or whoever said I began to exist. These are abstract concepts. These are categories and labels that we have given to things, and so yeah, you as in James or Johnny, your identity began to exist as an abstraction, but the material you're made out of did not. So I think we can make a distinction between abstract and concrete objects when it comes to what begin to exist actually refers to.
Yeah. So Leo, do you see how that's a different point than discussing the B theory?
Well, I don't know why you keep saying that I'm like just trying to discuss the B theory. I
No,
was making
I'm just
reference to the
pointing out that
question that was asked
his
and
contention's
pointed
not the
out
same thing.
how the philosophy of time is going to be relevant to this discussion. And then JJ asked a few questions. It were good questions that sort of led that, and then the discussion kind of organically went in that. I'm not saying we have to continue talking about it, which I don't know why we keep bringing it up. We can move on. I'm okay with that. I'm just pointing out that that's just kind of how the discussion here organically ended up developing.
Yeah, I'm just saying that there is a concern even on the A theory based on Null's contention and his explanation. So do you agree with his
Yeah, of
categorization of what
course.
he was saying? Okay, based on what? What's your understanding?
Wait, with like respect to what he just said?
Yeah, okay. Let me ask you this way. Do you think that things begin to exist under the A theory? Like if you assumed A theory, do they begin to exist?
I would say broad. So, under specifically a presentist view, yes, there are supposedly at least other atheoretical views. But that's just some nuance that we don't really have to get into. So, I guess just for the sake of discussion, I would say yes. I think that under atheoretical views, things are considered to begin to exist.
Right, and I don't think he agrees with that because of what he's talking about of things being recombined and changing from different states of matter and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I understand. Like, I track that. So I don't know if Noel disagrees for the same reason that I did, but I was expressing that I disagreed. And then, me and JJ were kind of talking with the cup of coffee. And the reasons why I expressed that I disagree have to do with philosophy of time and that I take a B theory. I don't know if Noel does or not. I don't know if that's the reason why, but that's kind of where that came from. So, you would have to ask him with respect to his particular objections, which framework he's working from.
Yeah, but I'm asking you, wouldn't you agree under A theory, and given that explanation, why you don't think it's sufficient? In other words, why do you think you would have to appeal to B theory in order to make that type of objection? Why don't you think that
What
works
type
on
of
A
that
theory?
things don't begin to exist?
Yeah, correct.
Because on the atheoretical view, there's like realism about the tenses, and so the present is real, is what's real, but the past and the future are not, which means that things physically come into and go out of existence, whatever that's supposed to mean, which I think is something that Noel is trying to get to, but I could be wrong. So I think under a B theory, there's just a space-time continuum, sort of the quote-unquote block, and there are various points at which certain things are extended, but they may not be extended through all points, and certain agents may be extended through points that which other things aren't extended and thereby don't ever experience those things. But to say, does something exist? I would say yes. To say, does it always exist? Well, now you're complicating things because you're including tense to language.
Yeah, I wasn't doing that. I mean, that was JJ before. I don't know if he wants to come back with the coffee situation at all and discuss with Null.
What's to discuss about it?
So I would make the point that if your premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause, then you have to examine what everything begins to exist really means. Are you referring to abstract objects and concrete objects, or just material? Like, what are you referring to? And to then combine that with premise two, the universe began to exist, well, that helps you narrow things down. So the universe is definitely, well, I shouldn't say definitely, is a concrete object. I mean, if somebody disagrees with that, then they get into the abstract part. But because the universe is assumed to be a concrete object, and they're using that as a premise, along with its brother, that would imply that when they say everything that begins to exist has a cause, they're referring to concrete objects begin to exist, or those concrete objects that begin to exist have a cause. So then my question is, other than the universe, to the theist, can you give another example of a concrete object that began to exist? And I would contend
Yeah.
that there are no examples, it's just recomposition.
Yeah,
Agreed.
so Null, do you know the difference between the A and B theories of time?
So the point I'm making here is not
I don't even think that
relevant to
matters.
time. I do know
Yeah,
the difference,
that's my
but
point. That's okay, correct. So you're not making an objection that is based on a B theoretic version,
no,
correct?
What
correct.
does
Okay, that's my point.
does begin just not mean anything to you? No.
Begin to me means that it wasn't there and then it was there. And if you're just talking about recomposition, then there was stuff there before and there is stuff there now. It's just reordered. So I don't think that's beginning.
Right. You
Yeah.
have a
When you make a
proprietary
pie,
definition of the
are
word
you
begin.
saying that the pie didn't begin? That the pie always existed?
So the abstract concept of a pie began to exist when we called it.
We're just talking about concrete things.
So
No, I think we established we're just talking about concrete things.
okay, if we're just talking about concrete material, then no, it never began to exist. The pie is just a different word that is meant to combine certain ingredients together in our minds.
So you don't think pies really exist?
Because
I, I, I
you're
think the
talking about
concept.
That's not what he's saying.
the
No.
concept of a pie doesn't refer to a pie, it refers to the
No.
composition of
You
stuff.
guys are missing his point. JJ, does the sun rise in the morning?
Yeah.
What do you mean by rise?
Let's talk about pies.
Now, the fact that I asked that question, does that mean that we don't have a concept of rise, or does it just mean what
we're talking about
we
beginning
mean by that? Because
and we're talking
are
about
you saying
pies.
that the sun literally moves upward? Because I don't think you would say that's correct. The Earth.
Rather than
I'm drawing an analogy.
I know,
I'm
but
not
why don't we just
distracting.
talk about the
I'm
pie?
drawing an analogy. How about we get to the end
Why
of the
don't we
analogy,
just talk
and
about?
then maybe we might have a little bit more understanding of what Noel's
I
trying
don't
to
think.
say. So
if we stick to the pie,
when we talk
which is
about
a perfectly
rising,
good
and we
analogy,
ask about like what this means, we're not saying we don't understand
just
what
a
the word
distraction.
means. We're saying that there are different contexts in which it might mean different things, and we're just trying to understand
right.
exactly
So
what
let's
it means
stick
in this
to
context.
begin
So
just like when we say the sun rises in the morning, we don't mean it literally moves upward. We mean that, that the earth is rotating. So like, I'm just drawing an analogy here. Just bear with me. It's not going to hurt you.
Here, I can help.
It's just distracting away from the example.
Except I'm literally on topic with it, so I don't understand.
Hold on. Here,
Leo, I thought you disagreed with this argument based on the A theory, but now it seems
Look,
like
I'm just trying to help
so
people
confused.
Understand points. Stop trying to pin shit on me because that's not helpful.
I don't think
I'm not talking about my positions here.
Personal.
I'm not talking about my positions. Everything you just heard me said has nothing to do with what I believe. I was trying to present an analogy in an attempt to help JJ understand the point that Noah was trying to make. I hope I did that correctly or meaningfully, but I don't know if I did.
Yeah, but you disagree with Noah's point. That's clear.
Well, that doesn't really matter here. I don't know why you keep going to whether or not me and Noel agree. I'm
because
just
you're
obfuscating
the actual conversation.
How? By trying to provide clarification in my obfuscating.
Let's go back to pi.
Yeah.
So you're going to make claims and then not defend them. Okay, that's fine.
Because you're obfuscating the conversation.
Can you explain how? No, you can't. I didn't.
Like I said, I don't think it helped. That's what I'm saying. I think if we stick to the example of the pie and what it means to begin, that's more helpful, Leo. That's all. Rather than bringing another concept and the different ways it could be understood. But we're talking about beginning. What do you think? What does beginning mean then here?
Honestly, all of this is not as important as it sounds, because in the context of the Kalam argument, if you're claiming that a recomposition and then putting a name on that means it began to exist, then you would have to be implying that the universe is a recomposition that we just then called the universe. And if that's the case, then it was not created out of nothing. And if you're claiming God created the universe, then he created it out of something prior to the universe, which I don't think any theist claims.
I think you're going way beyond the scope of what we're talking about, though.
I agree, JJ.
No, okay, so using the example of your pie, right? So all of the ingredients of the pie pre-existed. You put them all together. Now it's a pie. If you claim
because it wasn't a pie before that.
Right, hold on. If you claim that the pie began to exist, then for you to say that the universe began to exist in this same way means that the universe was a recomposition of pre-existing material. And I don't think theists claim that. Is that what you claim? Is that what the Kalam is suggesting?
Well, see, not exactly sure. This is probably where we agree that I think there's confusion about these things, about what it means to exist or what universe implies, as opposed to everything.
Well, yeah, I mean,
but we're still trying to figure out what it means for a thing to begin to exist, JJ. I mean, that's the point where we're focusing on now with the pie example.
That's where I thought we were, right.
Yeah, so if you claim that a composition of pre-existing things coming together makes it begin to exist, then to me, that loosens the understanding of what begin to exist means, and it weakens what the Kalam arguer is actually claiming.
No, I think that's exactly what the Kalam arguer is actually claiming. That's the whole point.
But I mean, going back to what was said earlier, Craig, the Kalam first champion, he absolutely insists that he claims the universe began ex nihilo. I mean, he says that all the time, that God created the universe out of nothing. And so he cannot use the Kalam in this way because that would imply that it was
the Kalam.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with what we're discussing.
Well, I mean, Craig is the contemporary champion of the Kalam argument.
Have you heard Craig?
You're referring to
respond to this
beyond the scope of the Kalam.
Yeah, I've heard him say it makes you a nihil, or I don't even know how to say it, the nihilist thing.
Mereological nihilist, yeah. So
right, which his objection to that is
his point is that what he means by begin to exist is something akin to what JJ is saying, not something like what you're talking about. That's the point. Now you can reject that. You can reject that that's what it means for something to begin to exist, but that's not how it's functioning for Craig. In fact, I posted literally in the chat the conditions for something to begin to exist. So I can post it again if you want to. You can see the formulation.
Well, is what you posted, does that include pre-existing material recomposed and then given a new name, does that begin to exist?
Sorry, I was just reposting it. I posted it again. It includes anything.
Okay, so that doesn't seem. So you're not referring to recomposition at all. So if I took 4 logs and combined them and then called it a chair, did the chair begin to exist?
Did you make a chair?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. If I take these 4 logs and this flat thing and I put them all together and then I pointed at it and said, "There's a chair." Did the chair begin to exist,
Yeah,
or did I
And
just?
that's where I would say yes.
if you actually made a chair, then yes.
Okay, so if you would say that is an example of something beginning to exist,
Yeah, that's what Craig is
then
saying.
Craig is not saying that, because he says
Yes,
the
is
universe began
exactly
to
what
exist
Craig
ex
is
nihilo.
saying. That is
No,
exactly what
Craig's
Craig is saying. You can
Craig says
disagree
the
that that's
universe.
what it means for something to begin to exist, but that's
Hang on,
exactly what Craig is saying.
Craig exactly says the universe began to exist ex nihilo, from nothing. That's what he says. He does not say it was recomposed of
Dude,
pre-existing
what
matter.
does that have to do with the example of the chair? Has nothing to do with it.
The, the chair was recomposed of pre-existing matter. So if you're referencing a recomposition as
Yeah,
something beginning to exist,
you're just confusing. You're just thinking that that's the only way in which something can begin to exist. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that if it qualifies and fits the criteria mentioned, which I just put in the chat, then that's an instance of something beginning to exist. So the pie or the chair or anything else that fits that is an example of that. That doesn't mean that creation ex nihilo of creating the universe wouldn't apply, because it would. It would also fit the same criteria mentioned.
so
Here's
if
the
you
thing. Wait, 1 second. Say you didn't have any logs and you just made the chair without logs, without anything. It still began to exist, right?
in that example, it began to exist. The material poofed into existence.
Right. So whether you use the logs or you use nothing, it still began to exist, right?
Yes, I
Thank you.
agree with that. Yeah. So where I will say is, if you only focus on the first premise, I totally agree with you. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. But the only examples that we have of stuff beginning to exist is recomposition. That's it. And so if if you incorporate premise 2 and say that the universe began to exist, and that fits in the category of everything that begins to exist has a cause, then by our standard, we would have to say that the universe is recomposed. It didn't actually poof into existence, because we don't have any
That doesn't
examples.
follow. It doesn't follow at all.
So when you say everything that begins to exist has a cause, does that include both recompositions and poof into
Yes,
existence?
that's the whole point.
Okay.
That's what I just explained to you.
Do we have any examples of something poofing into existence?
That's a different question. We're focusing on the first premise of the argument, and your question was about what does it mean for something to begin to exist. I posted in the chat and I said that it's meant to cover both examples, creation ex nihilo, or your idea of something poofing into existence, and recombination of matter, just like the pie or the chair or anything else. It's meant to cover both examples. Just because of the fact that we only have familiarity with one type of example, which is your claim, doesn't mean that the other example doesn't fit the criteria. It's just a question of whether or not it's actually true,
I don't think
which
he's
is
saying it
what's up
doesn't
for
fit the
debate.
criteria. He's asking for an example, I thought.
Yeah, that's a different point
But
then,
if
because
Well,
then
yeah, but
he's
why is
talking.
it
He
not
originally
relevant though?
it isn't relevant to the initial point, which was about what does it mean for something to begin to exist.
so if
Oh, okay,
if
and
the persuasion,
And that's the point, because unlike you, Leo, when I am actually tracking a conversation, I like to clear up
I've
the
been
previous
tracking this
point.
conversation.
I actually like to clear up the previous point, which was a sticking point, before I move on to the next
It
one.
seems more like
Because
you don't have
that's
examples to give, and so you're trying to avoid that
no.
question.
Can
First
I
of
can I
all,
give an example?
first of all,
So then
hold
why
on,
can't
JJ.
you just give an example? Where do
Hold
you
on,
have it?
JJ.
Do you have one?
First of
See,
all,
I don't
Leo.
think you do.
First of all, you're obviously not tracking this conversation
You
because
can do that. That's fine.
I'm not even arguing for the Kalam right now.
Nobody said
I'm
that.
just
So that's
discussing.
not
I'm
relevant
just
to what's being
discussing.
asked
Yes,
of
it
you.
is.
No,
Yes,
it's
it is
not. Nobody
because
said
you're
that. So
asking
that's
me
not
for an
that's not
example,
relevant
which
that's
I don't
being
need to
asked of you.
provide any example. It has nothing to
Yeah, you're
do
just
with the
avoiding the
initial
question.
contention. What was
So
happening?
can I
You're
jump
Well,
in?
lost, dude.
So
I
hang
think I
on.
do have an example, though. And I mean,
Okay.
it depends on whether or not you believe in virtual particles. I mean, do you think that those poof into
No, they
existence,
don't
or
poof into
do you think that
existence.
they? Well, how would you describe virtual
They're
particles?
just the fluctuations in fields. They
Yeah,
would
but
be akin to waves on the ocean. Do waves poof
are
into existence on the ocean? Of course not.
well, no, are virtual particles, are they a recomposition?
No.
Then
They're virtual.
then
They're not.
they.
Are
They're not
waves on the
concrete.
ocean a recomposition? No, they're not. They're
I don't understand the
fluctuations.
analogy. I'm just talking about
Waves on
virtual
the ocean are
particles.
fluctuations in the energy contained in, like, the sort of, I could say, like, I don't know, the first 10 feet of the ocean or something like that. That's all virtual particles are,
Yeah.
quantum fields.
Here.
So they.
They're the result of the fact that the fields don't sit at zero energy.
So virtual particles, they exist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and then they don't exist.
No, they're just the field. It's like saying, do waves exist and then don't exist? No, it's just the ocean. Waves are just the ocean,
I'm not talking about the
fluctuating.
ocean. I'm talking about virtual
Holy shit! Do you not
particles.
understand analogies? Oh my god.
Well, some analogies I
What
understand.
do
I
you
don't
think that
understand
waves?
this
Do you think that
analogy.
waves on the ocean are something over and above the ocean itself?
No.
Just in
I
a
don't know. I'm
state of
talking about virtual
fluctuation.
particles.
Holy
I don't
shit!
understand the analogy.
I really don't think you can't track analogies.
Well, this one I don't. No.
Okay, well, so then
Admittedly,
work.
I don't understand the analogy.
Okay, great. So then work with me here. Do you think that waves on the ocean are something over and above mere fluctuations in the ocean?
I don't know enough about waves on the ocean to understand your analogy.
I would say no. I mean, what waves in the ocean
I just don't understand.
are the ocean
I don't understand your analogy.
What virtual particles are the quantum field fluctuating. Like that's virtual particles are not particles like actual particles. That's why we call them virtual particles.
That's not my understanding of virtual particles, for one thing.
Well, that's the quantum field theoretical understanding of virtual particles.
Is it? That's not what I understand it to be. But my understanding is that they are something that do not exist and then don't again.
There's something to which you can apply a creation operator, but it doesn't sit at enough energy to equal to mass of the minimal particle of the field. So it is a virtual particle, but it's not a particle. So that's what it means.
Measurable or something?
What?
They're not measurable.
Can I hop back in? Sorry, we're getting kind of lost in the virtual particle.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I come to you with the premise of everything that begins to exist has a cause, and I ask you, do you agree with this? Now, before you answer, your mind is going through everything that you think began to exist, and every example that you will come up with is a recomposition. And so you will say, yes, everything that begins to exist has a cause, but the only examples you actually have are recompositions. So then when I come along with premise 2 and say that the universe began to exist, am I referring to a recomposition or a poof? And in Craig's case, he's claiming it's a poof. So it's a little bait and switch. He gets you to think that recomposition means begin to exist, and then he offers something that was a poof, not a recomposition.
Well,
Not
technically,
true at
the first
all.
premise of the
I
Kalam
thought
doesn't
you were.
specify ex nihilo
Yeah,
or ex materia. So
yeah, it has nothing
Jeez,
to
I
do
can't
with it.
believe
And I
this.
thought you already agreed. Hold on, JJ. I thought that he already agreed whether it was the poofing or the recombination, both were considered to be something beginning to exist. I thought he
The
agreed to that
poofing
already.
or recombination is irrelevant, right? It can be
Yeah,
either.
but he already agreed to that, I thought.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but we don't have any examples of a poof. The only examples we have are recomposition. So when you bring premise 2 into it, and you say premise 2 applies, it has to only fit into the recomposition category. Otherwise, you could not accept premise 1 because you don't have any reason to accept
Right.
it.
Do you think that virtual particles are a recombination? Or do you think they always exist?
I really agree with the analogy of the waves over the ocean. That's how
I don't understand
scientists
that.
actually describe virtual particles.
I don't
So
understand that.
Thank you.
Motion in the
Doesn't
ocean
matter.
creates waves. You could say that the wave began to exist, but no, it's actually just
Creates.
the ocean at a different elevation.
Do you think that
Exactly.
it's a recombination? When virtual particles begin to exist, however brief,
but they don't
are they a
begin to
recombination?
exist.
They don't. Virtual particles don't begin to exist. They are actually. We don't
They
observe
always
them.
exist?
No. We don't observe virtual
Well, that's
particles.
just a
These are just
false dichotomy.
mathematical.
I think this is irrelevant.
Yeah, virtual particles are just mathematical concepts. We don't have any observation of them.
Let me ask
Well,
JJ a question.
technically we
Hold on a second. Hold on a
do.
second, guys.
We only observe their effects.
Hey, hold on a second. Let me ask JJ a question because this is where I think, in my opinion, people's attempt to sound so sophisticated, it ends up making people sound stupid. JJ, let's say I have a furniture store and you buy a picnic table off of me, and I ship you a tree. Will you accept that as a picnic table?
I would say that's not a picnic table.
Well, why not? Why not, JJ? I mean, it's just synthesized. So I'm talking about. This is where I think people. It sounds ridiculous.
So you
Let
don't
me get that
understand the difference
coffee.
between concrete and abstract, I guess?
I gotta take a
Yeah,
time
I
out.
understand. But this argument that you're trying to put forward, again, in an attempt to sound so sophisticated, it
Johnny,
it
surely you
becomes
Johnny,
understand.
what are you
silly.
doing?
You understand
Johnny,
the difference between
what are you
concrete and
doing?
abstract, don't you, Johnny?
Yes.
Please
Of
explain for
course.
me. I don't.
Yeah, I
Explain
have
for
an
me, please.
example of things poofing into existence.
Let's hear it.
Well, first you're gonna have to agree that emergent things happen. Like if you stack a bunch of bricks, you get a wall.
So if you're going to claim consciousness poofs into existence, consciousness is an abstract concept.
Well, see, like that's going to be a claim that would have to be defended on their own. But I think a lot of people accept emergent properties.
What?
Yeah, like wetness.
Yeah, but those don't poof
They
into
don't poof. Yeah,
existence.
it doesn't poof into.
Well, certainly it's not just like a recombination of like bricks, because you could move a bunch like 3 bricks together, and it's not a combination of them, because it's going to be like an amount at best.
It's an abstraction because if you were an ant, you would think one brick was a wall.
Okay, so what?
A wall is an
I think we're getting in
abstraction.
a spot of semantics. Yeah, we're getting in a
Jesus.
spot of semantics of how we
Do
identify
you
or
do you agree that there are emergent properties?
Absolutely, of course.
Okay, and how do those come into being?
They emerge from
What does that mean?
compositions of other things.
Okay, were they there before?
The abstraction, no. The concrete stuff, yes.
Okay, what do you mean by a property if it's like not like, are you saying properties are abstractions?
I'm saying wetness is an abstraction. I'm saying a wall is this abstract concept that we have applied to certain things, certain compositions of matter. It's a label. And labels are abstractions, yeah.
Well, some labels refer, don't they?
I'm not sure what that means.
I think that's to say that labels have reference.
Yeah. I mean,
like if I label something as hot, I'm referring to like some state of affairs or something. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can point to a glass of water and say, like, this is a glass of water. Are you saying, oh, it's an abstraction, it's meaningless? I just don't understand your point.
So a glass of water is made up of material. We can all agree on that. And then we communicating
Well,
bodies,
isn't
we
material
assign a
a
name to
label?
that.
Isn't material a label?
Matter?
Yeah,
I'm talking about like
wouldn't
the
matter be a
physical.
label too?
I'm talking
I mean,
about like the physical atoms and molecules that make up
yeah,
everything.
atoms and molecules,
So
those aren't labels?
you're referring to the words I'm using. I'm actually referring to the concepts that the words are referring to.
Yeah, and
Run it
if I
with a
point
different
to a
term.
glass of water, you know, it's a glass of water. I don't understand your point.
My point is, abstract concepts, including labels, those come into existence because they require minds. But the material itself, that was always there. The water was always there. The material that makes the glass has always been around. It's just recomposed and then we slapped a name on it. So sure, you can argue all day long
Okay.
that these abstract concepts come into existence because we slapped a label on it. But that's very different from creation ex nihilo, which is what Craig insists on about the universe. And that's what the Kalam is claiming.
I don't think the Kalam says it's ex nihilo.
Well, that's what Craig says. Yeah, you're right. That's not included in the Kalam. But I think the slipperiness of that first premise is by saying everything that begins to exist has a cause, and Craig wants to include the poof concept, when in reality the only examples we have are recomposition. So if I were to ask you, if I were to say, everything that poofs into existence has a cause, you could not agree with me on that because you have no example to refer to.
That's correct.
So if you would not agree to that, then there's no reason you would accept the Kalam argument. And I have to run. It's my chess night, so I've really enjoyed the chat. Thanks so much. You guys carry on.
I was curious to ask you how old you are.
Me, no, I'm 40 years old.
Why aren't you 13 point something billion years old?
Because I refers to the abstract concept of my identity, null hypatheist. And I have been on this
So,
earth for 40 years.
so you, in a technical sense, you've been around even during the Jurassic time, right?
The material that I am composed of, absolutely. We are all made of star stuff.
This is the stuff that it's like, man, this is what people are really arguing for. I mean,
John.
it's
Wait, it's
ridiculous.
just saying he's like a meteorological nihilist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of insulting, can we get to the argument of why it doesn't make sense? Because literally, we all come from what came before us. So why would that be logical that he came from things that preceded him, like we all did? Why would that be illogical?
Yeah, it's an attempt to say, well, you didn't really come into being. You always were. Like, for example, there's no use to argue that a father's sperm came into unison with the mother's egg and produced a child.
No, that's
You can't
literally
even
the
argue
case.
that. We can't even
Sorry, John.
say this person had a new baby as if this something is wasn't before. No, it always existed in some form. So
Now,
I mean,
Johnny,
it's just a silly
you're
argument.
But it's true.
Johnny, you're using confusing language. Johnny, when you say you have always existed, no, that's wrong, because the label that you is referring to is the identity, the composition of my current state. Now, the material that you or I, in this case, am made up of, that has always existed. So you need to be
Yeah, I think
careful of your word
it's
choice.
yeah, but well, that's what it is. It's word games. I mean, you came into being.
Yeah. So
Oh, but the
Yeah, but I think you're
material
playing the game,
that I
John,
was made up of always was here. Yeah,
which is
but that's
true.
not what really. Well, who is disputing any of that?
Right, but I'm saying you're making it sound like it's a problem that we are looking at
It is a
things
problem
logically.
because I think it's a gross attempt to say to either minimize or uh, you know eliminate this idea that anything new that wasn't in its particular state as we see it now actually didn't come into existence. It's just an argument. It's a semantical argument, I think, and
Yeah, that's all argument of feelings, John. It's a
Personally, I think I said this in the chat in the other room, which was that it's the sort of thing that any 3-year-old correctly understands. That people start learning a little bit of philosophy, start to question. Do you think cars exist? Is there a car, at least one?
A direct question you wanted me specifically to answer?
Is there at least one car?
What we would identify and what we'd label as such.
So there is at least one car.
I'd say that what we describe as such, I'd say I see one.
Yes, so there's at least one car. A car it has various parts, it has metal pieces, it has engines, it has wheels, it has tires, it has atoms, and so on.
Yeah.
A car. Nevertheless, there is a car, right? The car isn't just.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
Were there any cars a billion years ago?
Not that I'm aware of.
Let's just say no, right?
Yes, real. We wouldn't expect.
Do you want me to? I'll make it more easy. Okay.
We would not expect there to be.
Right.
I'm going like this. I'm in like teacup floating around whatever that planet was. I may not know, but we wouldn't expect it based on the time that we understand.
With cars, 1 second after the Big Bang. Let's just make it easier, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Oh, there was a time at which there were no cars. There was a time at which there were some cars, right? So there were some cars that began to exist. That's all it means for something to begin to exist, to not exist at some time and exist at some time.
Now, yeah, there's a question about whether there's something that we would apply a label to. Now, in as much as
the car,
let's say that we didn't actually.
Andrew, you already agreed that cars actually exist. That was the point of the question.
Well, I say that there's a point in time where we said this thing that I have used my will to put pieces together on, I'm now calling a car. I mean, the moment.
Yeah, but it's not just that we're saying making those sounds. There is a car there, right?
Yes, but there's just a point where we go, yes, the car is now done enough. Like, let's say, I'm in the process of assembling.
But does the car actually exist?
I'm not requiring that there's some precise boundary where something.
Well, there is.
The car exactly begins to exist at this millisecond.
No, but there is a gray area there, somewhere in between.
I agree.
And then we draw a line. It's like going, it's a car now. We do have to draw that line, though.
Yeah, but he's just asking if cars exist, if there's any car whatsoever.
Fine with there being some vagueness in this sort of.
So we draw lines, and all the atoms and everything that made it up until that point, the matter was there. We put it together with our intent, and then we.
I'm not asking you about the atoms. I'm asking about the cars.
The label. So we've achieved the label.
Well, we've achieved the label on many different things. But the point is that there is a thing there, the car. There is also a thing there, the atoms. The fact that we have labels for one and the other doesn't really make a difference. There are those things.
The label just is for the description, right? It's for the properties of the object we're trying to describe.
So
the word has a meaning. So
chair has a meaning. So super vague. But when I say, can you get me a chair when I'm visiting your home? I think you're going to bring me something that I'm going to find to be a chair.
Yep.
You're not just going to I have no idea what you're saying.
Yeah.
No,
can't you just use your mind to make a chair here for me? Just intention it on any of these things.
I don't know. Can I make a chair magically appear underneath my butt, out of pure thought before my butt hits the ground?
Well, no, I'm saying, and like, it seems like you want to say that I could go over and say, right, and I think we'd all kind of agree to the vagueness here being like, well, this piece of wood, this bat that's kind of thicker enough that you could kind of lean against it like a single-legged stool. And I'm just going to call it a chair, right? But I might pick something that you would find offensive and not call a chair. I might pull something very valuable out and say, I'm going to sit on this valuable, fragile thing. And you're going to say, that's not a chair.
And there's a right answer of going, you know what? It is now. It's the same sort of thing as a person who picks up a screwdriver when they don't have a hammer and go, it's a hammer now. It may not be the tool we intended. It may not, sometimes the intent behind retribution has meaning as well. I can use something as a hammer and it's not a hammer.
I understand that.
Right?
Yeah.
You can hammer with any object because hammer is describing.
It's also a verb. Yep.
Right. It is, right? And you can hammer some things with it, but we wouldn't say necessarily that it's a hammer.
You know, you can use a person
Andrew,
as a chair in that sense.
Andrew, it's very simple, right? There's a question about when something is considered a human being, for example, right? People question, well, in the development of a fetus, when does it actually become a human being, so on and so forth. But nobody really questions whether or not human beings exist, right? So it's the same thing like a car. Yeah, there's going to be sort of borderline cases where you're saying, well, is this a car or is this a human being? Fine. But we're just simply asking if human beings exist, if cars exist. We're not asking for what are the precise, what's this precise moment in which you can call something a car or a human being. We're just asking if human beings and cars exist.
Well, once again, we didn't call it a car until enough of those pieces made it together.
That's irrelevant. Do any cars exist?
Is it?
Yeah,
well,
it is irrelevant.
Now we've decided to say that once enough of these parts are together, I'm calling it a car. What happens if the manufacturing plant suddenly doesn't have motors? Do I still call it a car?
Dude, it's very simple. Do cars exist or not?
We decided what a car means and what that entails, and we say that we do have them. Correct. We have made things that we have said are sufficient to the description. It is sufficient to what we consider a car.
So the answer is, I mean, it's a yes or no question, right? Yes, there are cars, right? I mean,
yes, that's only a question of enough, and it's a question of whether I acknowledge that it's a car. Now, take it to a person. If you say, do cars exist, to a person who's never seen one before and doesn't know what that is supposed to entail, you have to give them the concept.
Andrew, that's irrelevant. Do you believe that cars exist?
They wouldn't understand what you're saying when you say that cars exist. But
if
the point is that yes, cars exist,
and there's no one around to hear it,
oh my God,
does it still make a sound?
Andrew, you seem very confused about whether or not cars exist.
No,
that's what it seems like.
No, I acknowledge the thing we call cars. I've seen them.
No, not the thing we call cars, but does a car actually exist?
The question is, are there at least one? Is there at least one car? It's a yes or no question. It's just
yep.
So yes,
right. For the concept I've got, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So the rest is going to follow because you don't think that cars always existed. Right. And the rest just follows. I mean, come on.
Does it cease to be a car? How much does a car have to lose to cease being a car?
Oh my God, dude!
Can those atoms
relevant to what we're talking about?
Well, no. This is just a question about whether or not this is an ex nihilo question. That's the entire point of this, as to whether or not the universe came into existence. Is it
right now? We're just talking about cars.
I guess you missed the entry point of the conversation was with regards.
No,
to
I didn't. I know this is relevant to the Kalam stuff. I'm just
that's
not what we're talking about at the moment.
Well, maybe you're going separate from there, but I'm looking at this through that larger lens of trying to say, when is it have a name? Does a car, if there's no one around to say that something is a car, is it still a car? Eggs, without a mind, do those atoms stop being a car?
Do you think anything exists?
No, of course
do you think nothing else exists if no minds exist?
No less than the atoms would stop being there. The car would still be there.
But what makes, if there's no person around to say, I wanted to make a vehicle as we have an intent to do it, if all of a sudden there's no one there, picture some other entity, let's call it an alien. Let's say an alien somehow ends up on Earth. There's cars around. All the humans are gone. And they've never seen a car. They don't even know how they got to our planet. They did not design anything like this. They got teleported by an even more advanced race. So a being who's never seen a thing, poof, they see these things just sitting there. Is it actually a car?
Yes.
To them? What is it to them?
What do you mean to them? Whether it's a car is not subjective.
They have no intent. They have no idea what this is for. They just see the thing sitting there.
It's still a car,
you mean they can't
right? The fact that they're not describing it
as
such or using that language to think about it is irrelevant.
The
same thing would go regarding the fundamental particles.
When does it start? When does it stop? And is it only because we perceive it?
Does a star exist
only because we perceive
Does
it?
a star exist because people think that it's a firefly? It doesn't exist because
Well,
people think it's a firefly and they point at it and say, "There's a firefly," and it's a
uh,
tiny little
uh,
bug that flies through the sky.
well, that's all they see. But there's a question of
It's just,
is that matter there? This is just down to the ex nihilo question, really. Like
well,
that.
I'm just
It's
asking.
a
I'm
question about how
asking
far you
It's
had
not
you,
to
about
go
ex
on
nihilo.
Lance.
It's just there. Like
It's just
I know,
there,
the
right?
aliens are there.
I
The
know.
aliens are not
And
there.
so
The other stuff is still there. I don't.
so the thing is that we gave special attribution to, well, now it's a car instead of just a pile of atoms. At some point, we decided it's something.
By the way, this special attribution is no more special than the attribution to like particles or anything like this. They're all just things that exist, right?
Yeah, but
Like
that's the thing. It's like
protons.
saying that basically, when we think of actually coming into existence, it sounds like an attribution in that sense in anything physical we see, as opposed to, oh, poof, did car literally appear from nothing? Like there was no matter, but somehow all of a sudden now this matter exists out of nowhere.
Existence is going to be a
Dude, what the
property.
hell are you talking about?
The whole
Existence.
point of did the universe come
Existence.
from nothing?
Existence is going to be a property of everything that you concrete that you can see or touch, right?
That
Wouldn't
is
you
the
agree?
questions.
No, I'm
That is the
asking
question.
you. You don't think
Yeah.
existence?
No,
You
I
take
do.
existence
I'm not
by.
arguing. I'm not arguing against that. I'm arguing that we have no sample of anything coming purely into existence. Purely.
So, can I try to give
existence?
Can I try to give a more interesting example, potentially more interesting example of what Andrew's talking about? I don't really hold this view, but like maybe I'm trying to steel man it. Like, does something like a Wi-Fi network exist? And if so, like in what objective sense does it really exist? Because all that gives Wi-Fi network a meaning, right, is a sort of subjective thing that we give, like a value that we give to it, right? That because in reality, it's just a set of like extremely disconnected parts, like separated by a large set space, but like a similar collection of objects, right, that are equally separated by distance wouldn't necessarily be called an object, right?
I don't see that necessarily being any different than saying I've got a car. It's like there's an intended.
I know, but I think the example maybe reinforces that, right? But I think this example reinforces it, right? Because there's a sort of, the point is it's an arbitrariness to what makes something an object and what doesn't.
I think. I mean, if you have a term that can, so I'm certainly a universalist when it comes to.
You think we're all going to heaven?
Composition here.
Joking.
Yeah. No, but look, I can talk about. I could say I could just invent a new term, a flurb, and what a flurb is something as a flurb if it's the composite of a tree and the nearest dog, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe I could use the normal example, the normal term for that, which would be a trug. And there are trugs, right? Because there are trees that are, and they'll have parts that are part of a dog and parts that are a tree.
Right.
I guess I don't see any issue with that, or Wi-Fi networks, or cars, or.
Well, if you think like what do you call them, trogs or whatever, right? If they're objects, right, just the same as a tree is, then object is just an arbitrary. Like the existence of objects, right, is completely subjective and arbitrary, right?
Existence of
objects. Like what is it on? Like why do like trees exist? You want to say I think that trees exist, right, in some ontological sense.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so do trogs, I guess. Now that you've defined them. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can now make. I need to define it to be able to even make the statement, but
yeah,
there were.
But trogs clearly existed before you came up with the idea, right?
Right.
That seems odd.
The statement that there were trogs does not exist, but of course that stuff was still there.
The concept maybe didn't exist.
Yeah, but like it's odd to say. It seems odd to say that trogs existed, right?
Why would that be any more odd to say that protons existed?
I mean the concept is just a description of what you're something else in the world, right? Like you're trying to say the thing out in the world didn't come into exist because we recognized a value with categorizing it this way or picking it out.
That's, I believe, the core of where this was supposed to be intended for, is that everything did kind of come from everything else, and at no point that I'm aware of has anything literally come out of nothing. We have no sample of that being a thing anywhere.
We're not talking about coming out of nothing in this case. We're just talking about things beginning to exist. And you're not really clear on whether or not you think cars actually exist.
Well, that was a little separate. No, it's a separate for the idea of what coming into existence is, as opposed to an idea for us giving a label to it. Like, at what point do those pile of atoms get a new name? Oh, now it's an X, as opposed to, well, those atoms.
Why are you
moving
talking about
that
the
way.
pile of atoms? Right, it's true that thing.
No, the point
has
is
atoms as
at
parts,
what point?
Like, who cares?
Well, the issue with the Kalam is saying that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, where is beginning to exist with matter? At what point is...
Dude, I think you're too worried about the conclusion and, things to consider later down the line rather than dealing with the actual issue that we're talking about now, which is do things actually begin to exist and whether or not cars exist.
No, well, this comes down to, if we have no samples of anything else on that scale, it's just a question. Basically, this challenges the soundness of the entire argument.
No, it doesn't.
If X begins, if
we're not talking about ex nihilo right now. We're just talking about things beginning.
We're not really talking about the argument.
Yeah, well, it's attacking the soundness of the first premise.
Andrew, serious question. Are you trolling or are you being serious right now?
No, I'm serious.
Okay.
No, basically, it's like saying everything that exists has a cause. Well, all causes seem like I made up of atoms. Those atoms were somewhere else. Everything else moved. Everything else, I don't know where that start is. At no point do I see a sample of anything in the reality that I know of that truly came into existence from nothing. Everything was always caused by things that are already here. How does that first premise work?
Because we're not just talking about things coming existence
to exist part.
We're talking about things that come into existence.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, an atom. Does an atom just come out of nowhere?
Well, an atom turns into another atom, right?
So once again, that's a reconfiguration. It's not from nowhere.
Right. You just mean to say, like, energy can't be created and destroyed. Energy and matter are interchangeable.
Everything we see, yes.
Right. And so you just want to say that you just hold to that principle and that not
so much that I necessarily fully hold to it. It's that we have no sample to the contrary that I'm aware that we can point to. Do we have a sample of anything that does not do this? Now, I don't want to call it Black Swan. Why we have a principle.
Does not do what?
Where do I have a sample of something that does come out of nothing? True nothing.
Yeah, but now you're asking a different question. So there are two considerations: whether or not we have an example of something beginning to exist out of nothing versus something beginning to exist in general, which was your original claim. You made a stronger claim that nothing, strictly speaking, begins to exist. And that's what we've been focusing on with the cars and the pies and everything else, right? So we want to get that settled before we talk about ex nihilo and any of that other stuff.
Well, this was meant as a paradigm to try to describe that. Perhaps it didn't come out the way it was originally.
Andrew, you began to exist, right?
Well, I still have to draw that line. I could say I think I exist now.
Yeah, so it's not about ex nihilo.
So.
Things begin to exist in general.
At what point
was there a time that you did not exist, Andrew?
Well, what am I becomes the question at that point.
Oh, fuck off.
How much?
All right.
No,
That's
no,
enough.
seriously.
Bye-bye.
Like,
Nanda, you tell them all about it.
Well, maybe somebody can give me the short version of that since he's not interested. But am I
weird
me?
to
Am I
weird to
me?
be
Like
skeptical about your
3 cell divisions
self-existence.
into being conceived?
No, it's just a weird.
Is that
JJ, you gave up that quick, dude. Who else is gonna
Is
go?
that
with
is that
it?
no? Is that enough? Is like
doesn't-
three
Clearly,
cell
we got to go
divisions-
back to the
3
pie.
cell divisions after conception enough? How much? How much
Andrew,
is
it's
enough
just
to say me?
it's just weird to be skeptical about
I'll
yourself.
No, it's a question about at what point
I'll
do you
accept
want to call
no.
me?
I'll accept no.
We're not requiring that there is a sharp boundary. The fact is that you do exist now.
If when you say it comes into existence, you got to kind of draw a line, don't you?
Not a sharp one. You don't need to.
Andrew,
how vague do you want to be then? If you don't,
Andrew, do you exist?
To be honest, it doesn't
Do
matter.
you exist?
The fact is that there's
Dude,
a
do you
first
exist?
day of your
doesn't
existence.
matter. If it doesn't
Like the
matter,
first
then
year of your
everything
existence.
exists. Everything exists, and everything has ceased to exist. You need a boundary. You have to.
Andrew, do you exist right
The
now?
silent ship kind of fallacy, right? Whatever that's called.
Where I am, I'd like to think where I am qualifies. So yes.
So you exist right now.
In my own mind. I think
Only
I've
in
got
your
it.
own mind?
No.
What
The
are you
question
talking
is
about?
like, well, there's a question of who says what me represents.
Andrew, do you exist? Yes or no?
When he says in his own mind, he's answered yes now,
yes.
right? You said,
I'm
but
putting
when he says in his own mind, he's saying, my opinion is I exist. Fine, Andrew, I'll accept that.
Thank you for acknowledging my existence. I will treasure this moment.
I will take you at your word that you think you exist.
Yep.
Fine. Was there a time that you did not exist?
Well, I didn't perceive it, but we kind of assume it.
In your opinion, I mean. In your mind.
Opinion? I imagine there was a time I didn't.
You imagine? Okay, I'm going to accept that. You can conceive of a time that you didn't exist.
Yep.
So, didn't exist, exists now. I don't care where you draw the line. You began to exist, right?
Well, as much as I attribute me to being me, maybe some
as much, yeah. As much as all that, then what?
Yeah.
Yes, I hope you say.
When do I get permission to kick Andrew?
Oh my God!
Is existing more than
never
a label?
Never, John Lee. This is the same reason we keep you around and don't kick you.
We should encourage that behavior. He's politely asking for permission, right? That's good.
I mean, I'm listening to
Andrew. Am I correct?
JJ,
am I correct, Andrew?
The pie was always a pie, just a different form of pie.
Yeah, is this guy like 0.2 or something?
Andrew, I don't care where you draw the line.
So this isn't now.
Do you accept that you did not exist? You exist now. You began to exist somewhere in between there. Is what?
Yes, colloquially, sure.
Colloquially?
Hey, like I said, at what point do I consider how conscious am I? How conscious am I at 1 month? Like being,
I don't give a shit.
Irrelevant, dude.
I know. Well, that's the thing is do I consider that moment? I
don't care. I will reiterate.
There will be a point.
I will reiterate. I don't care where you draw the line. Consciousness, blah blah. Celebrate. I don't care about that.
Fine.
You acknowledge that you began to exist.
For X number of years, I'd say I'm.
Don't care.
Yes.
Irrelevant.
Sure. X amount of time, I believe I exist. Yep.
You believe you exist now. You believe you didn't exist before. Somewhere along the line, you began to exist.
Wait,
right?
Actually, that doesn't follow, right? Because you could just say that there is a range of times at which. JJ, it's too easy otherwise.
I did actually kind of say that as just a question as to if am I me without consciousness? Is there?
Well, he's saying there's a range of times, right, where it's undefined.
Doesn't matter where it is. Doesn't matter where it is.
It's not that it doesn't. It's not. It doesn't. It's not clear that there is a point. That's what he's saying, right?
Look, it can be a vague boundary, but that doesn't mean that you didn't begin to exist.
Yes, vague boundary. No, that's exactly my point. I've said that.
Yeah, don't care what the boundary is.
I told you that 20 times.
I already conceded to that.
it's like, look, there's a difference between saying like we don't know where the boundary is and saying that the boundary itself is undefined, right? Like saying there's a range of times at which
I've already conceded
that's
to
what I'm
that,
saying. Like you
and
can
I expect
have
there to be
an actual big
boundary.
boundary. Like there's sort of no factual way
then
where
right, but
it actually
but
starts.
Detroit, if that's the case, then you can't even point to a single point. Like you can't. I mean, there's no point in time in which he began to exist, right?
There's
Like
no
there's a range
instant in
of
time.
times. Huh?
Well,
sure, that's fine.
Funny
But
enough,
you can still talk about
for,
the first like year of his existence and stuff. And like, look,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
we
Yeah.
can,
But this might be relevant for the Kalam, right? Because the Kalam talks about specifically began to exist at a time index t, right? So rather than just a
although
range.
what's funny is that Craig doesn't even believe in instants himself. He only believes in intervals. So,
Okay. Well, yeah. Then it might be okay. Yeah.
but the framing of the what it means to begin to exist on his view seems like it's
I mean, is it just me, or are people just coming up with just nonsense only to object to the Kalam cosmological argument by Craig? Is that my imagination?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. No, this is a very valid thought here. Just going, I've never seen something literally pop out of nothing. So the idea that the universe purely began to exist is not something I have a sample of. Do I have a?
We're not talking about things popping out of
Is there
nothing at this moment.
Is there a car?
We're talking about things beginning to exist.
Like John, actually, to answer your question, I don't think at this point, like the people who are talking with the last half hour care about the Kalam, right? I think we all rejected, including Jake.
No, I think Andrew does. I think psychologically he thinks that if somehow he concedes to cars existing, that the rest of the argument is going to go through, which is just obviously not
Exactly.
the case.
That's what it seems to me.
No, but if you want to continue putting
It
thoughts in my
seems
head, I mean, have fun with that.
no. I'm just saying that's the way it seems like to me. It's like a psychological block.
And I'm not. I'm trying to separate the idea of us attributing a label to that collection of atoms as creation versus there was not stuff and then matter magically exists. I'm trying to draw that so that there isn't.
Stuff gets created all the
time. Not the same thing as cars beginning, dude.
Does universe ex nihilo? Does anything in this universe ex nihilo?
That wasn't your original claim. Your claim was not about ex nihilo. Your claim was that nothing in general begins to exist, ex nihilo or otherwise.
I didn't want to see the conflation between when I give a label to something as exist versus ontologically existing.
Yeah, your view is just that cars don't exist.
I'm making sure not to conflate.
People don't exist.
Don't conflate the terms.
You don't exist. Clubhouse doesn't exist. Phones don't exist.
No,
that's just your view.
It's a question about whether or not.
But is he saying that we give them the label incorrectly? You know, we say that there are cars, but actually there are no cars. I'm unclear here.
No, the whole point was just to not confuse ex nihilo creation is in something literally from nothing versus yes, I'm made up of atoms. Do I have atoms literally out of nothing? Does all the matter in the universe come out of nothing magically?
Dude, it's like how many times do we have to repeat the same thing?
I know. You want to get caught up on the thought is there
repeating and saying that and bringing up this ex nihilo business has nothing to do with what we were talking about.
The man just invoked magic.
The original point of whether or not
nobody here's talking about magic. Andrew, except you.
Andrew, if you want to get to that part of the conversation, would you just like, for the sake of argument, to proceed the conversation, just say we're just going to accept that things begin to exist, but you're not saying that matter or energy begins to exist. Would you say that?
For the sake of argument, saying yes. Do I exist? For instance, that usage of it, sure. Yeah.
Because listening to you and everyone else talking two different conversations is irritating me. So I would just prefer to get on the same topic if we could.
The topic wasn't originally supposed to be as whether or not where a person exists. That's something else dragged it that way, but
It's
that was
okay.
never the original point of that.
No, that was the original.
We started on pi, and somebody then brought it down to persons and cars.
Yeah, because they're analogous. That's what pies and cars and persons, they're all standing for.
They're all things that begin to exist.
But not out of nothing. Not out of nothing. They're like, you can keep your materialism and say it's still made out of material. The material didn't begin to exist. Okay.
Were y'all talking about pie without me?
Yeah. Now you guys can move on to the next
There's
part of the
unlimited
conversation.
pie.
I
Pie
think
is
Andrew,
hypothetical.
Would it be safe to say, Andrew, rather than being a pie guy, you're more of a pie kit guy, right?
I think Andrew would say that before there was pi by 2.
There was a pie kit.
I see a pie in someone's face is what I see.
There's pie ingredients. It's like the person says,
if you want to make a pie,
Mom, there's nothing
scratch,
to eat in the fridge. All we have are ingredients. The ingredients were always there.
Okay, so Friction and Jake, do you guys want to continue at this point in the
Oh
conversation?
hell, I'm definitely
Yeah, but
do
you're
not want
assuming
to
the
continue
refrigerator
with him
exists.
now.
No, I do. And you order blueberry pie, and the waitress brings you out ingredients.
Wait a minute, does a
Would you say
waitress
that-
exist?
Would you say you received pie, JJ?
You know, I got a funny one for you, Johnny. This
It's actually just undetached waitress parts, believe it or not.
Build your own waitress.
It's
I love
Adam's.
it. This
It's
reminds me
Adam's.
of the joke at the IKEA job interview, where the interviewer says, "Take a seat." And meanwhile, there's a box and an Allen key. Yeah.
Adam's arranged waitress wise.
I think you're confusing the IKEA interview with To Catch a Predator.
I'm not sure how we got here, Jack, but I admire you.
Wait, actually, I don't get that. Okay.
It was because he said take a seat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Is that show still on?
I'm not really sure, but I'm sure JJ would know.
Does a seat exist to
JJ
take,
keeps
though?
track of that, yeah.
Is there a dog?
I mean, it's really surreal listening to somebody who won't admit to some sort of existence. I don't know what to make of it.
Only the it's
also
label.
It's also
not the existing.
It's also
only the label.
surreal to think that there could be 3 persons in one substance.
I mean,
sounds like a red herring.
I knew that was coming.
John, it's also surreal to think that Davy Crockett.
You know, non sequitur a day is worth 2 in the bush.
So what's this guy's deal?
Oh, dude. I don't think you want to know.
That was very strange how Null left and this guy Andrew just picked up right where he left off.
I hate to leave pie just laying around. It's criminal.
Yo, Andrew, have you ever made a sandwich? Yeah, that's way too much time. That's way too much time to be answering that question, bud.
No, that's I was entirely worth it.
Hey, Andrew, have you ever seen American Pie?
I made something that is called a sandwich.
There's a good saying for this, I remember. In order to make an apple pie from scratch, we must first create the universe.
Look at this. Let me see.
Yeah, I already quoted that.
Agnostic atheists looking to be more well-versed philosophically. Okay, Andrew, let me tell you something, man.
Let me tell you something. I'm sloppily moving forward.
Let me tell you something, man.
Tom, your audio sucks.
Yeah, I know. I'm driving.
It's fine.
I mean, do atheists upload this kind of stuff to put it out there?
Yeah, Andrew, man. I've talked to like a lot of people over the years, and there is a certain subset of people whose brains can't handle philosophy. It's actually very, very detrimental if they learn philosophy. You might be in that category. You might not want to be more philosophically inclined. You're already you can't answer whether or not you've ever made a sandwich, right? You got to like assume the thinker's position to like contemplate that, right? So you getting more into philosophy? No way, bro. No way. You need to do the opposite.
Thanks, I think.
But if you have that problem, there's a few people that you could talk to Matt Adams. He has a similar issue.
Oh no!
He's talking about for some people.
That was
Matt will tell you he made a sandwich right off the bat.
Matt's another one. I think Matt becoming more, so-called well-versed has probably impeded his ability to think.
Yeah. I wasn't doing
Andrew.
Andrew.
That was
I
harsh.
actually like the new.
Andrew, have you ever made a sandwich?
You know what? I think I should be able to commit to that and just say yes.
Oh, the
sure.
cheers, the peanut gallery cheers.
Really stick yourself out there.
No, if I want to rely on sensory experience and saying that I think I'm an agent and think I've done something, you know what? Sure.
Still had to think about
it. That's sure.
Yep.
I believe I made a sandwich. I trust my sense perception that my hands acted with intent.
Oh, really?
Did the sandwich begin to exist?
But I dropped in here like momentarily earlier, and they were talking about like, do cars exist? And you couldn't answer that, right?
I haven't made a car, but I own one. But sure.
Andrew, would you be willing?
You already know the distinction I was, trying to draw, but feel free to keep poking fun at me. I've probably earned something, so I'll take it.
Yeah, but the distinction which prevented you from saying that cars still exist with sandwiches, right? But you answered sandwiches.
I think he sort of said that cars exist.
No, I did. No, like I said, I was just trying to
Yeah, but he backtracked.
The whole reason for the line of questioning that I ended up picking up was for a different purpose, and it was just a question about whether or not that counts as conflating a word to mean two different things.
Oh my God, dude.
So yeah, silly me for trying to draw a distinction, but yeah, it looks silly if you want to extend it full out.
Oh boy.
Yep. Have we exhausted the point that was supposed to have been made at least?
No, I think there's still a little bit left.
Oh, in what sense did you make a sandwich?
A delicious sense,
I guess.
If you're lucky.
Culinarily.
What?
Walk us through this process of
culinarily. I believe that's a word. If not, I'm conjugating it now.
Are you trying to say culinarily?
Words have usages, not definitions. So heck, I'll invent it.
So by sandwich, you mean
if it isn't a word, it is now. Welcome to low grade balderdash.
Well, what do you mean by sandwich? What is
he culinarily?
How do you define
a sandwich?
A sandwich.
Culinarily is a word, but
yay! I used a real word.
I mean, because everything's a word, really. But also, words not only have usages; they have definitions.
Can I create my own? Am I limited on how many I can create?
Sounds like John Lee. I think John Lee sent Andrew.
Oh no. No, John Lee lives what I joke about.
There's probably some limit, but I don't think that's really relevant.
I love Gray.
There's this time earlier today.
Consider now then objections to the second premise that the universe began to exist. Objection number 6. Nothing ever begins to exist, for the material of which a thing consists precedes it. So it is not true that the universe began to exist. Response to number 6. I think this is my favorite bad objection, since the assertion that nothing ever begins to exist is so patently ridiculous. Did I exist before I was conceived? If so, where was I? What was I doing during the Jurassic period? Has the World Trade Center always existed? If so, why didn't the Native American Indians notice it? This objection obviously confuses a thing with the matter or stuff of which the thing is made. Just because the stuff of which something was made has always existed doesn't imply that the thing itself has always existed. Now, since writing this talk, it has occurred to me that the objector could save himself from the embarrassment of affirming that he has always existed by adopting what's called mereological nihilism, which is the view that there are no composite objects. That is to say, all that exists are just fundamental particles which are arranged in various ways. So in fact, there really are no chairs or tables or horses or people or palm trees. There are just fundamental particles which are arranged chair-wise or table-wise or people-wise. And so in denying that he ever began to exist, the objector isn't affirming that he's always existed. Rather, what he's denying is that he ever does exist. So in this case, the cure is really worse than the disease, because now instead of saying he has always existed, what the objector has to say is that he doesn't exist. The objector literally does not exist. Now, if that's the case, then it might make us wonder why we should bother responding to him if he doesn't exist. What this implies is that, in fact, nobody, literally nobody, has ever raised this objection, because there aren't any people. But this is surely absurd. Am I to believe, am I to affirm that I do not exist? It reminds me of the undergraduate student who had been reading Descartes and burst into his professor's office early one morning, bleary-eyed and unshaven. Obviously, he had been up all night. He was very distraught, and he said, "Professor, tell me, do I exist?" And the professor looked at him and said, "Who wants to know?" The idea that one does not exist is surely metaphysically absurd. So that it seems to me that this is simply to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. Well, the serious point of this muddled objection, I think, is its presupposition that everything that begins has a material cause. But that claim is irrelevant to the truth of the two premises of the Kalam cosmological argument, and it would require proof in any case. Now, it is true, I think, that in our experience, material things do not begin to exist without material causes. So we do have the same sort of inductive evidence on behalf of material causation as we have for efficient causation. But if we have good arguments and evidence that the material realm had an absolute beginning preceded by nothing, this can override the inductive evidence. What we cannot reasonably say, I think, is that the universe sprang into being without either an efficient or a material cause, since being does not come from non-being. But there's no sort of metaphysical absurdity involved in something's having an efficient cause, but no material cause. Objection number 7. The argument equivocates on begins to exist. In premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. It means begin from a previous material state. But in 2, the universe began to exist. It means not from a material state. Answer to number 7.